In this list, we'll be going over cards that used to be really hard to summon in the past, but had a few new pieces of support released that made them much easier to bring out. And at number 10, we have Silent Magician level 8. This card can only be special summoned by the effect of Silent Magician level 4, and cannot be special summoned by other ways. And on the field, it has the passive effect to be unaffected by spell effects, which isn't half bad considering it's a 3500 attack beatstick. Silent Magician level 4 has the effect that each time your opponent draws a card, you get to place one spell counter on the card. And once this card has 5 spell counters on it, during your standby phase, you can send this card to the graveyard in order to special summon Silent Magician level 8 from your hand or deck. So under normal circumstances, it would take you about 5 turns to get the necessary spell counters in order to bring out Silent Magician level 8. You could speed this up, however, by simply giving your opponent more draws with stuff like One Day of Peace or Dark World Dealings, or just cards that can play spell counters on this card. But they also had a card at the time called Level Up, which basically allowed you to send Silent Magician level 4 to the graveyard in order to cheat out a Silent Magician level 8 from your deck. And this little card was the way to cheat out level cards in the past, so I guess there was already a way to get out Silent Magician level 8 easier, but it wasn't until the normal Silent Magician was released that it became much more playable. Silent Magician, with no level in its name, can special summon itself from your hand by tributing any spellcaster type monster you control. While in the field, it gains 500 attack for each card in your hand, so a similar attack boost to Silent Magician level 4, who gains 500 attack for each spell counter on it, which are placed on him by your opponent drawing cards. Silent Magician also has an effect, where once per turn you can just negate the effect of one spell card, and having a once per turn negate on any spell is pretty strong, which is why this card saw lots of competitive success in Duel Links when it came out. And then on top of that good effect, it also has a floating effect, where if this card is destroyed by battle or an opponent's card effect, you get to special summon a Silent Magician monster from your hand or deck, ignoring its summoning conditions, which means Silent Magician level 8. And since you can activate this effect by just crashing it into one of your opponent's stronger monsters, this made this card really good and hard to get rid of, because if you managed to destroy the card that was negating your spells once per turn, you would instead have to deal with a spell immune 3500 attack beatstick. Although this was pretty much a Duel Links exclusive meta card, and it never actually saw competitive success in normal Yu-Gi-Oh! And it did already have Level Up, which allowed you to bring it out easier right off the bat, which is why this card only gets the number 10 on this list. And at number 9, we have Super Vehicroid Stealth Union. This is a level 9 fusion monster which requires 4 specific monsters for its fusion summon, which meant it was really hard to bring out when it first came out, as getting 4 monsters for a fusion summon was hard enough as is. But getting 4 different specific monsters was nearly impossible. In a consistent deck, I mean. You can technically do anything in low-stakes gimmicky environments. And the card was commonly laughed at for not being very good, as when it declared an attack on a monster, its original attack got cut in half. But it could absorb one of your opponent's monsters once per turn, which was a good effect. It could attack all of your opponent's monsters, which was another good effect, and it dealt piercing damage if it attacked a defense position monster, which was a nice little icing on the cake. But the fact that it was very hard to bring out and also halved its attack when it did attack things meant it didn't see any kind of competitive play. But then again, Roid decks are kind of not very good in the first place, so no one was super surprised. But then a new card was released called Mixeroid, which allows you to banish a whole bunch of Roid monsters from the graveyard in order to special summon a fusion monster that has the same level as the number of monsters you banished. And it was definitely not Mixeroid that made Stealth Union easier to bring out. In fact, it wasn't a Roid card at all. You see, there's this Cyber Dragon card called Cyber Dragon Nova, which requires 2 level 5 machines with its materials, and it has an effect to special summon Cyber Dragons from your graveyard. But it also had a strange floating effect, where if it was destroyed by an opponent's card effect, you could special summon any 1 machine fusion monster from your extra deck. And when the card first came out, one of the better targets was Super Vehicroid Stealth Union, because it was the only high-level machine fusion monster with some form of removal, as all the other ones were just big beatsticks. But then, very shortly after, they released Cyber Dragon Infinity, which is one of the best boss monsters in the game. And it also allows you to absorb one of your opponent's monsters while being able to use it as Xyz material to negate card effects. So Cyber Dragon Nova stopped really staying on the field, and was generally only used as a combo piece to go into Cyber Dragon Infinity immediately, as that card had the effect that let it rank it up on top of Cyber Dragon Nova. So, for an incredibly short amount of time, some people online who were playing Cyber Dragon decks were using Super Vehicroid Stealth Union and bringing it out if Cyber Dragon Nova was getting destroyed. But that didn't last very long, and it never saw competitive play. And at number 8, we have Number S0, Utopic ZEXAL. This card requires 3 Number Xyz monsters with the same rank in order to bring it out. Or you can rank it up on top of a Utopia monster by discarding a rank up magic normal spell card from your hand. So it was kinda difficult to bring out in non-rank up decks, especially after Master Rule 4 limited how easy you could get out multiple Xyz monsters. So before Master Rule 4, there were occasionally decks that would try to bring this card out and saw some competitive success, because it has a really good lockdown effect, where once per turn, during your opponent's turn, you can detach one of its Xyz materials in order to make it so your opponent can't activate card effects this turn, which is just a full-on lockdown of basically everything they can do, besides normal summoning monster to try to attack over this thing, who only gains 1000 attack for each of its Xyz materials. But after Master Rule 4, this card no longer saw any kind of play, until Master Rule 5, or Master Rule Revisions changed things, where you can now bring out Xyz monsters to the main monster zones. So it was possible to get the 3 monsters in the field for this card's summoning condition a lot easier. And 2 new cards were released in addition to a whole bunch of new Xyz monsters: Numeron Network and Numeron Calling. Numeron Network is a field spell card that allows you to send a Numeron normal spell from your deck to the graveyard in order to activate that card's effect. So if you just send Numeron Calling, you can use its effect, which allows you to special summon up to 4 Numeron Gate Xyz monsters from your extra deck, just as long as they have different names. They're banished here in the end phase, and you can only normal or special summon 1 more time for the rest of the turn. So using a single Numeron Network will basically allow you to get 4 Number Xyz monsters on the field, who can then be combined into Number S0 Utopic ZEXAL, which is definitely an engine that a lot of decks are experimenting with in the current format, because Utopic ZEXAL is definitely worth running all those cards to bring out, as it's one of the best lockdowns you can do during your opponent's turn. And it used to be balanced around the fact that it was difficult to bring out in non-rank up decks, but Numeron Network makes it much easier to use, which is why it takes a spot on this list, and is definitely the most competitive card on this list. Although the top 7 spots were a little bit harder to bring out, so they just get higher spots for being made easy. And at number 7, we have Mirage Knight. This card can only be special summoned by the effect of Dark Flare Knight, and Dark Flare Knight is a fusion monster which requires a fusion monster as one of its materials, and can only special summon Mirage Knight from your hand or deck when it's specifically destroyed by battle and nothing else. And what Mirage Knight does is it basically has a built-in honest effect. When it attacks something, it gains the original attack of the monster it's battling, but the card banishes itself during the end phase if it's involved in a battle. So it was hard to bring out, only stayed out for about 1 turn, and only really had battle effects, so didn't really see any play. Especially since the only way to get out Dark Flare Knight easier, besides trying to actually bring out the Flame Swordsman normally, was to bring it out with instant fusion, so you could then use normal fusion spell cards to bring out Dark Flare Knight with Dark Magician, which wasn't really worth it, considering it only had a floating effect to go into a monster that could only exist for 1 turn. But then later on, they released a card called the Eye of Timaeus, which allowed you to send a Dark Magician monster you control to the graveyard in order to special summon a fusion monster from your extra deck that required Dark Magician as one of its fusion materials. So thanks to the Eye of Timaeus, you could easily bring out Dark Flare Knight without needing to mess with the whole Flame Swordsman thing, as the card fusion tag wasn't released until much later after the Eye of Timaeus, which also made it easier to get past the having to use the Flame Swordsman. So, in the Dark Magician deck, who himself is much easier to bring out nowadays thanks to Magician's Souls, as long as you just draw into the Eye of Timaeus, you can basically bring out Dark Flare Knight no problem, in which case getting it to be destroyed by battle to bring out Mirage Knight is still kind of a problem which can be fixed if you just give your opponent a kaiju and then crash into it intentionally, as Dark Flare Knight doesn't take battle damage. And at number 6, we have Halaktai, the Creator of Light. This card can only be special summoned from your hand by tributing the 3 original god cards of the same name, which means you can't use name changers in order to cheat it out easier, with stuff like Phantom of Chaos. But if you're able to summon this card, you instantly win the duel, so it's kind of worth trying to bring out all 3 of the god cards, who each require 3 tributes to be normal summoned. But it was a little bit too cumbersome because they're all high-level monsters, and because one of them cannot be special summoned. It's always a tough order getting 3 specific monsters on the field, and even harder to do it if they have restrictions on how they can be brought out. So there's plenty of ways to cheat out Slifer the Sky Dragon, or Obelisk the Tormentor, you could send them to the graveyard and then special summon them later for the whole bunch of different methods. But you always had to normal summon the Winged Dragon of Ra, which required a whole bunch of setup and made bringing out the Creator of Light way too difficult. But then recently, they released some new Winged Dragon of Ra support that made bringing it out much easier. More specifically, Ancient Chant, which allows you to add the Winged Dragon of Ra from your deck or graveyard to your hand and gives you an additional tribute summon that turn, and Millennium Revelation, which allows you to send the Winged Dragon of Ra from your hand to the graveyard in order to add a monster reborn from your deck to your hand, with a second effect where Millennium Revelation can send itself to the graveyard in order to allow you to use Monster Reborn to special summon the Winged Dragon of Ra, ignoring its summoning conditions. And Monster Reborn is an excellent card to special summon monsters from the graveyard with. One of the best ones, in fact. So, the biggest problem of bringing out the Creator of Light was bringing out the Winged Dragon of Ra, and that is heavily offset by one of its new support cards, which makes bringing out the card a lot easier, but it is still difficult to bring out. It's just not as impossible as it used to be. And at number 5, we have Neos Wiseman, a card I never thought would actually appear on a list like this. You see, Neos Wiseman was originally a fusion card in the anime, but its effect was a little bit too strong for its day, so they thought to nerf it by bringing it out as a main deck effect monster, which made the card completely unplayable. As a way to bring out the card was to have 2 high-level monsters on your side of the field, and you need to have Neos Wiseman in your hand, in which case you'd send those 2 cards to the graveyard in order to special summon the card from your hand. And getting 2 specific high-level monsters on the field at the same time is quite difficult to pull off consistently, and so was searching out Neos Wiseman from your deck after accomplishing that feat. And what you got for all that effort was a card that could not be destroyed by card effects, and at the end of the battle you could inflict damage to your opponent equal to the attack of the monster it battled, and then gain life points equal to the defense of that monster. So it wasn't a half-bad effect on a 3000 attack monster, it was just way too difficult to bring out. And then they released a card called Elemental Hero Neos Kluger, which is basically a fusion version of Neos Wiseman, which required an Elemental Hero Neos and a Yubel as its fusion materials, which are the exact 2 monsters needed to bring out Neos Wiseman. And Neos Kluger has a floating effect, where if it's destroyed by battle or leaves the field because of any opponent's card effect, you can special summon 1 Neos Wiseman from your hand or deck, ignoring its summoning conditions. And that's not all. Neos Kluger also is really easy to bring out, as it's a target for Neos Fusion, which allows you to use fusion materials from your deck in order to bring out a fusion monster that has Elemental Hero Neos as one of its fusion materials. So a single Neos fusion in the hand without any other kind of setup on the field can bring out a Neos Wiseman eventually, after Neos Kluger gets destroyed. And Kluger himself also has a similar effect to Neos Wiseman, where when it battles a monster, it gets to inflict damage to your opponent equal to that monster's attack, which is just straight up a better replacement to Neos Wiseman that also allows you to bring out Neos Wiseman 10 times easier. And thanks to this one card, it's no longer one of the hardest cards to bring out in the game anymore. And at number 4, we have Elemental Hero Divine Neos. This is a fusion monster which requires 5 monsters as materials, and of those 5 monsters, at least 3 of them need to be a hero, Neospacian, or a Neo or Neospace monster. So it has kind of a convoluted amount of cards needed to bring it out, and its effect isn't super good on the field either, where you can just banish one of the cards that can use its material from your graveyard in order to have the card gain 500 attack, and that card's effect until the end of the turn. But the Elemental Hero archetype does have Miracle Fusion, so if you were able to just get 5 materials in the graveyard, you could use Miracle Fusion to use those cards from the graveyard as materials to get it out, which was still kind of difficult. It's not that easy to get 5 kind-specific monsters into the graveyard, especially in a deck that doesn't inherently have mill. But just like with Neos Wiseman, they released a new Elemental Hero card that had a floating effect, which made bringing out Divine Neos easier, in the form of Elemental Hero Grand Merge. Grand Merge requires any 2 hero normal monsters as its fusion materials, gains attack and defense equal to the original levels of those fusion materials times 300, and if this card destroys a monster by battle, you can tribute this card to special summon any 1 Elemental Hero fusion monster from your extra deck, ignoring its summoning conditions, with the only drawback being that it cannot attack monsters with a lower level than it. So, not really a floating effect, more like a tag out effect. So if Elemental Hero Grand Merge destroyed something by battle, it can tag out into Elemental Hero Divine Neos, making it much easier to bring out and probably being the only reasonable way to bring out Divine Neos, who can then use this effect in the main phase 2 to copy another card's effect, not that it really has any good targets to copy anyway. And at number 3, we have Armityle, the Chaos Phantom. This is a fusion monster similar to Halaktai, the creator of light, in that it requires you to send 3 high-level, hard-to-bring-out monsters to the graveyard in order to special summon it from the extra deck, with its only saving grace being that it's a fusion monster, so you don't need to search it out like you do with the creator of light. But the 3 monsters Armityle needs are much harder to bring out than the 3 god cards, as all 3 of them have restrictions on not being able to be special summoned except by their own effects. And the card specifically prohibits you from using Polymerization to bring it out, as you have to banish the 3 cards from the field in order to bring this card out. And it wasn't really worth being brought out, as it was basically just a big beat stick that had 0 attack during your opponent's turn. So it was kind of comically bad to bring out, as the cards you needed to use to bring this card out were better than it most of the time. But then recently, they released a whole bunch of new support for the Phantom Beasts, including a brand new archetype-specific fusion card called the Dimensional Fusion Destruction, which allows you to bring out Armityle the Chaos Phantom by banishing its materials from your hand, field, or graveyard, ignoring its summoning conditions. And being able to use the materials from your hand or graveyard is super good. Definitely made this card a lot easier to bring out, where it went from very hard to an easy backup plan just in case. In addition to that, a lot of the new support also made bringing out the original 3 monsters a lot easier as well, which definitely would have made bringing this card out on the field the old-fashioned way easier, in addition to its new fusion spell card. And at number 2, we have VWXYZ-Dragon Catapult Cannon. This card was originally so difficult to bring out that a lot of the old Yu-Gi-Oh games have achievements if you're able to bring this card out, as what it required you to do was banish its 2 materials from the field and not use a fusion spell card like Polymerization. So similar requirements to Armityle the Chaos Phantom. And its 2 materials were 2 fusion monsters, VW Tiger Catapult and XYZ-Dragon Cannon. 2 monsters who themselves had similar requirements, where they're both fusion monsters that also require the materials to be on the field and banished in order to bring them out of the extra deck. And if you were able to successfully bring this card out, you got a 3k beat stick which could once per turn banish one of your opponent's cards and change the battle positions of monsters that it attacked, which wasn't super good considering how much time and effort went into making this card, so it was squarely a gimmick. But then they released some new cards, more specifically better Union support in the form of Union Hanger, which is a field spell card that allows you to add a light machine Union monster from your deck to your hand on its activation, which half of the cards required to bring out Dragon Catapult Cannon were. Then Union Hanger has another effect, where if a light machine Union monster is summoned, you can equip an appropriate light machine Union monster from your deck to it with a different name, which allowed you to get the materials on the field a lot faster. And there's also Union Scramble, which can potentially allow you to special summon 3 machine type normal or light machine type Union monsters that are banished, which fits the criteria of all the cards needed for VWXYZ-Dragon Catapult Cannon. And these 2 cards definitely help bring it out easier, but they're not why this card is on this list. It's actually a random Ojama card that brings this card out the easiest, Ojama Simulation, which is a spell card that allows you to reveal a light machine fusion monster from your extra deck, then banish any number of Ojama monsters that you control or in your graveyard to special summon the fusion materials of that card with different names from your hand deck or graveyard. So basically, with 2 Ojama simulations and enough Ojama cards in the graveyard, you could easily bring out all the materials for VW, Tiger Catapult, and XYZ-Dragon Cannon, to the point where they even created 2 brand new, even harder to bring out versions of these cards. Armed Dragon Catapult Cannon, which requires that card and Armed Dragon level 7 its materials, and A to Z Dragon Buster Cannon, which requires ABC Dragon Buster and XYZ Dragon Cannon as its materials. This archetype is all about very hard to bring out fusion monsters apparently, with only the newest one being actually competitive, ABC Dragon Buster. And thanks to its plethora of new Union support, this card is much easier to bring out now, though you wouldn't really want to when you can instead just bring out ABC Dragon Buster with those same cards. And at number 1, we have Perfectly Ultimate Great Moth, who used to be one of the hardest boss monsters to bring out of the game. As what this card does is it's a 3500 attack beat stick who only has effects for conditions on how it can be brought out. And its conditions are tributing 1 Petite Moth on your side of the field on your 6th turn or after it was equipped with Cocoon of Evolution, which required protecting a weak monster on the field whose only protection was its defense being boosted to 2000 thanks to Cocoon of Evolution, and protecting it for 6 turns, which is incredibly difficult. So the card was just kind of laughed at as the ultimate worst boss monster in the game, since even if you did pull off the impossible task of bringing the card out, it didn't even really do anything except have a high attack power value. So then they released a new card called Cocoon of Ultra Evolution, which allows you to tribute an insect monster on either side of the field who has an equip card on it, in order to special summon any one insect monster from your deck, ignoring its summoning conditions, which means it can easily bring out perfectly ultimate Great Moth. And the card also has a great graveyard effect as well, where you can shuffle an insect monster in your graveyard back to your deck to draw a card. And since the card is so good in cheating insects out of the deck while also gaining advantage from its graveyard effect, it sees tons of play and is even a skill in the speed duel format, which is a pretty niche format that uses an incredibly small card pool, mainly because there isn't really a competitive insect deck currently. But if there was, Cocoon of Ultra Evolution would probably be good enough to see play in that kind of deck. And it also easily allows you to bring out one of the previously most difficult boss monsters in the game to bring out, which is why Perfectly Ultimate Great Moth definitely has to take the top spot on this list. Alright, and that's the list. Are there any other really hard to bring out monsters that were made easier over the years that I may have missed? If so, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments, as it was really hard just finding the 10 I had on the list. And also, did you know only 36.8% of people who watch these videos are actually subscribed to the channel?